The Grand Richmond Ballroom felt like a tomb. It was my own Senate campaign launch, the culmination of my life's work. 20 years of marriage, vaporized, 2 decades of political climbing, about to collapse. The whispers started first, a venomous ripple through my supporters. I followed their stunned gazes to the grand entrance. Eleanor, my wife, she wasn't there to support me. Flanked by my chief rival, Marcus Thorne, she wore his campaign colors like a declaration of war. She met my eyes across the room, her expression not of shame, but of chilling resolve. The affair was just the opening shot. She was here to take everything. My seat, my name, my future. This was her revenge. They moved through my crowd like sharks, parting a sea of my own stunned supporters. Eleanor, my brilliant, ruthless Eleanor. She wasn't just my wife of 20 years. She was the architect of my career, the strategist who knew every secret, every vulnerability I possessed. Beside her, Marcus Thorne, a political parasite who'd spent a decade nipping at my heels. The predatory smile he wore confirmed every whispered rumor I'd foolishly dismissed as paranoia. He hadn't just stolen my wife, he was wielding her against me like a weapon forged from my own trust. They stopped just feet away, the camera flashes turning my public launch into a strobe-lit execution. Thorne's hand rested possessively on the small of her back. Eleanor's voice was cold, precise, and loud enough for every microphone to catch. "Arthur," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, devoid of any warmth. "I believe the people of Virginia deserve a choice, a real choice." My campaign manager David hissed in my ear, "Sir, we need to respond," but I was frozen. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a perfectly calculated political assassination, and I was the target. My mind fractured, snapping back 3 years. We were an institution, Eleanor and I. Vance wasn't my name, it was our brand. I was the face, the voice on the stump, but she was the engine. She could dissect a polling district with the precision of a surgeon and craft a message that could make a devil sound like a saint. Our marriage wasn't built on romance. It was a merger, a consolidation of ambition. Love is a liability in this town, Arthur. She'd told me on our 3rd date, loyalty is currency. I thought we had an endless supply. The cracks started at the Commonwealth Club, my own political hunting ground. It was an old money, cigar smoke sort of place, where deals were made with a handshake and a glass of bourbon. I'd insisted she join me, to show the old guard that my wife was my partner. A power move. And there, in the dim, mahogany-paneled rooms, was Marcus Thorne. He was a backbencher then, a nobody. But he watched her. Not like a man watches a beautiful woman, but like a predator watches its prey's keeper, looking for a moment of distraction. I was distracted. The Senate race was consuming me. I saw their long conversations over cocktails as networking. I saw their shared lunches as Eleanor, simply doing what she did best, gathering intelligence. She was my weapon, and I never imagined she could be turned against me. The first real warning was a note I found on her desk, a simple handwritten message on Thorne's official letterhead. "The northern counties are softer than he thinks." It was intel for our campaign, or so I told myself. It was easier than admitting the truth. Easier than admitting that when I was on the road shaking hands, someone else was in Richmond whispering in my strategist's ear, "You're spending a lot of time with Thorne?" I'd said one night months ago, trying to sound casual. She didn't even look up from her tablet. "He's a useful idiot, Arthur, and his donors are bored with him. I'm just exploring new revenue streams." The chillingly corporate language should have been a siren, but I heard what I wanted to hear. She was working for Born, for the Vance brand. I chose to be blind, too arrogant to believe my chief strategist would ever entertain a hostile takeover. The glare of a camera flash pulled me back to the ballroom, to the execution. I was looking at the result of my own negligence. Thorne wasn't a useful idiot. He was the Trojan horse I'd personally wheeled through the gates of my own life. And Eleanor, she wasn't exploring new revenue streams. She was liquidating my assets. All of them. Starting with me. The roar in my ears wasn't the crowd. It was the sound of my own blood pounding. David was shaking my arm, his face a mask of panic. "Arthur, say something. The press is eating this up." But his voice was a distant echo, drowned out by the memory of the past 2 months. A slow, meticulous demolition I had been too arrogant to see. It began with whispers. Jessica, my best fundraiser, a woman who'd been with me for a decade, resigned over a curt email. "Personal reasons," it said. 2 days later, I saw a photo online, Jessica laughing over lunch with Marcus Thorne. When I showed it to Eleanor, she'd barely looked up from her screen. "Loyalty is a commodity, Arthur," she'd said, her voice devoid of emotion. "She got a better offer. You should have seen it coming." It wasn't a warning, it was a lesson. Then came the data. The bedrock of my campaign strategy, our proprietary polling for the crucial Piedmont region, vanished from the secure server. David was convinced we had a mole. I knew we had a queen who'd switched sides. That night I found her in the home office, the nerve center I had built for her, for us. The air was cold. "The Piedmont data is gone, Eleanor," I said, my voice dangerously calm. She didn't flinch, didn't even turn from her laptop. "Servers crash. That's what backups are for." "The backups are corrupted," I countered. "Wiped clean. Funny, isn't it? The only data missing is the exact information Thorne needs to counter our rural push." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. For a split second, I saw a file name on her screen before she minimized the window. "Thorne _ strategy _ V4 . My blood ran cold. This wasn't a leak. This was an excavation. "You're giving him our playbook," I whispered, the accusation hanging like poison in the air. Finally she turned, her chair swiveling with a soft, deliberate hiss. Her expression wasn't guilty. It was pitying. "It was never our playbook, Arthur. It was mine. I just let you run the plays." She stood up, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. "I'm reallocating my assets to a more promising venture." The corporate language was a deliberate stab. "Is that what you call him? A promising venture?" The question I'd been choking on for months finally broke free. "Are you sleeping with him?" Eleanor walked to the window, looking out at the city lights of Richmond, the city I thought we were going to conquer together. "Marcus recognizes talent, Arthur. He cultivates it. You just assumed it was yours to command." She turned back, her eyes like chips of ice. "My personal life is no longer a subject for your review, but my professional life is about to become your singular obsession." A chilling, triumphant smile touched her lips. "This isn't just about Marcus anymore. I've filed the preliminary paperwork. The people of Virginia deserve a choice, remember? And I think they'll prefer the architect to the monument." The memory dissolved, leaving me stranded under the hot lights of the ballroom. I was looking at the architect of my ruin. This wasn't an affair. It was a hostile takeover. And I had just been served with the eviction notice in front of the entire world. The world snapped back into focus. The camera flashes weren't strobes at an execution. They were spotlights. And I was still on stage. David's panicked hiss in my ear, "Do something, Arthur!" was the defibrillator jolt I needed. Panic was a luxury. Despair was a concession. And I would not concede. A strange, chilling calm washed over me, the kind that precedes a terrible storm. I looked past Thorne, dismissing him as the irrelevant accessory he was, and met Eleanor's triumphant gaze. She expected a scream, a protest, the public implosion of a betrayed husband. I would give her the cold fury of a statesman. I straightened my tie, a simple, deliberate act that silenced the room. I walked to the podium, the clicks of my shoes on the stage floor the only sound. The bank of microphones waited. I leaned in, my voice not a shout, but a low, resonant declaration that carried to every corner of the ballroom. "Wow," I began, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. The crowd held its breath. My wife, Eleanor Vance. She has always been my most passionate supporter. It seems her passion has simply found a new expression. Laughter, uncertain at first, then gaining confidence, rippled through my supporters. I saw a flicker of confusion in Eleanor's eyes. This wasn't in her script. I raised a hand to quiet the room. Eleanor is right, I continued, my voice smooth as bourbon. The people of this great state deserve a choice. And for 20 years, she and I have worked together, believing in the same ideals. I am proud to have inspired such a strong belief in public service in my own family. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, framing her as my student, my creation. So I welcome her to the race. I turned my body slightly, addressing the press corps directly. This campaign just became about a very clear choice. A choice between a proven record of service and ambitious political theater. I looked back at my wife, the smile never leaving my face. But let me be clear. While I admire my wife's courage, this Senate seat is not a marital asset to be divided in a separation. It belongs to the people of Virginia, and I will not let them down. I gave a final, decisive nod. David, catching on, signaled the sound tech. My campaign music swelled, a thunderous, defiant anthem. I had survived the ambush. The war, however, had just begun. The applause from my campaign launch was still ringing in my ears as we pushed through the back corridors of the ballroom, but it sounded like a death rattle. The air in the armored SUV was thick enough to choke on. David sat beside me, staring at his phone, his face illuminated by a waterfall of panicked texts and breaking news alerts. The headline from the Richmond Dispatch was already live: Vance versus Vance. Senate race explodes into marital war zone. They were framing it exactly as she'd intended. A messy personal drama. A soap opera. Voters hate a soap opera. The phones are melting, David said, his voice strained. 3 major donors have already put their contributions on hold pending a strategic review. That means they're waiting to see if you're gonna bleed out. I didn't answer. I just stared out at the blur of city lights, my reflection a pale ghost in the tinted glass. The man in the reflection looked calm. Inside, a cold, surgical anger was taking root. She had planned this for months. Every defection, every missing piece of data, every cold corporate phrase she'd used. It wasn't a series of betrayals. It was a business plan, a meticulously executed decapitation strike. We arrived at campaign headquarters, a sterile, open-plan office that suddenly felt like a morgue. My young staff, kids who'd believed in me, averted their eyes. Some were packing their desks. The televisions mounted on the walls were a firing squad, all aimed at me. On one screen, a pundit was calling it the most spectacular political implosion in Virginia history. On another, Marcus Thorne was giving an interview, looking grave and statesmanlike. Eleanor is a brilliant woman who felt her voice was being ignored, he said, the picture of false sincerity. This isn't about personal matters. This is about giving Virginia a new voice. He was using her script. Night Owl script. The one we developed for my campaign, twisted and repurposed. David followed me into the glass-walled conference room, the war room. It felt like a tomb. "What's the play, Arthur?" he asked, his composure fraying. "We need a counter-narrative. We need to hit back. We can leak stories about the affair. Paint her as an adulterer, him as a homewrecker." "No," I said, my voice flat. I walked to the large whiteboard that still held the remnants of my now useless campaign strategy. My handwriting, Eleanor's annotations in sharp red ink. That's what she wants. If I attack her for the affair, I'm just a jilted husband. I become a caricature. The old, pathetic man screaming about betrayal. She wins the sympathy vote, and Thorne vacuums up the rest. So we do nothing? We let her define you as yesterday's news? "We don't do nothin'," I said, picking up a black marker. "We change the battlefield." I wiped the board clean with long, angry swipes. The squeak of the marker on the smooth surface was the only sound. The problem wasn't the affair. The problem was that Eleanor knew every secret I had. Every late-night call to a donor, every political horse trade, every slightly too candid remark I'd ever made. She had a 20-year arsenal of my vulnerabilities, and she was handing it, piece by piece, to my rival, while building her own platform on its ashes. I couldn't attack her strategy. She was the strategy. I couldn't attack my record. She had built it. She called herself the architect. I mused aloud, staring at the blank white space. And me, the monument. It's a good line, David admitted grimly. It's a perfect line, I corrected him. Because it's true. But monuments are solid. They're tested. People know what they are. Architects, they just have blueprints. Promises on paper. Nobody's ever seen what she can build on her own. Her entire career has been in the shadows, my shadows. A memory sparked, something from years ago. A dinner party. We were celebrating a minor victory, a primary opponent we had crushed. Eleanor was drinking champagne, a rare indulgence. Someone asked her how she'd managed to so thoroughly dismantle the opponent's fundraising base. She'd smiled, a razor blade of a smile. Oh, it's a simple strategy. I learned it from my first mentor, Julian Croft. You find the single pillar holding up their entire structure, and you convince it that it's about to crumble. Then you offer it a new home before the old one even falls. Who's Julian Croft? I'd asked her later that night. My first campaign manager, she'd said, dismissing the question with a wave of her hand. A brilliant man, a little too trusting. He taught me everything he knew. His biggest mistake was thinking I'd be satisfied as his apprentice. I looked at David, the idea solidifying in my mind, cold and hard as steel. Eleanor's weakness is her history, or rather, her lack of one. To the public, she's Mrs. Arthur Vance, the brilliant strategist, the supportive wife. That's the only story they know. We need to tell them another one, David said, catching on. No, I corrected him. We can't. Anything from us is tainted, part of the marital war zone. We need someone else to tell it, someone who was there for the first draft. I turned back to the whiteboard and wrote a name in big, block letters. Julian Croft. David stared at the name. Julian Croft? The guy who ran for governor a decade ago, flamed out in the primary and vanished? What's he got to do with this? He was Eleanor's first major campaign, I said. Her launch pad. She was his protégé, his brilliant, ruthless, second in command. And 6 weeks before the primary, she quit his campaign, took his top 3 donors and his entire voter file, and went to work for his opponent. David's eyes went wide. He never recovered. The press buried him as incompetent for letting his own staff gut him. She told him the campaign was collapsing and that she was saving him from humiliation. I said, the memory of her long-ago confession chilling me to the bone. She convinced him it was a mercy killing. He believed her. He stepped away from politics and disappeared. I capped the marker and threw it on the tray. The sound echoed in the silent room. She's running as the architect, the brilliant mind behind the man. We're not going to argue with that. We're going to prove it. We're going to show the voters that this isn't the first monument she's tried to tear down to build her own pedestal. I locked eyes with David. How do we find a ghost? Even ghosts leave a trail, I replied, my voice hard. I want our best opposition researcher on it. No digital footprint. I want property deeds, tax records, utility bills. Find me Julian Croft. For 3 days, the campaign bled. We were in a defensive crouch, parrying blows from a ghost. Eleanor was everywhere and nowhere. She hadn't given a single formal interview, yet her narrative was dominating the airwaves. Anonymous quotes from former Vance staffers appeared, praising her strategic genius and painting me as a figurehead who took credit for her work. It was brilliant. It was her. She was dismantling my reputation with 1,000 tiny, anonymous cuts. On the 4th day, David dropped a single manila folder on my desk. Got him, he said. Blue Ridge Mountains. Bought 100 acres of timberland under a shell corporation a decade ago. Pays his property taxes in person, with cash. The man doesn't want to be found. The drive west was a pilgrimage into a past I'd never known. The polished marble of Richmond gave way to winding asphalt roads, then gravel, then finally a rutted dirt track that threatened to tear the bottom out of my sedan. The air grew thin and crisp with the scent of pine. This was a world away from the Commonwealth Club, a self-imposed exile. I found him splitting wood behind a modest, impeccably maintained log cabin. He was older, leaner than in the faded campaign photos, his face a roadmap of disappointment. But the moment he looked up, his eyes sharp and intelligent, I knew the fire wasn't completely out, it was just banked. He set the axe down deliberately as I approached. "Senator Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. There was no surprise in it. "Took you longer than I expected. Get off my land." "Mr. Croft," I started, holding up a hand. "I'm not here as a senator." "No, you're here as the latest victim." He shot back, wiping his hands on a rag. "I read the papers, saw your wife's little announcement. Familiar script. Different cast." He turned his back to me, stacking a piece of split oak. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. I left that world behind. She's using your playbook," I said, the words cutting through the mountain quiet. He froze. "The playbook you taught her." I pressed on, walking closer. "Find the pillar, convince it that it's about to crumble, then offer it a new home. She did it to your donors, she's doing it to mine. She's leaking stories about my incompetence, painting me as an empty suit, just like she did to you." Croft turned slowly, his eyes narrowed. The curiosity was warring with a deep, primal instinct to protect his hard-won peace. "And what do you want from me? A shoulder to cry on? I'm all out of sympathy." "I want justice," I said, my voice dropping. "She's running as the architect, the brilliant mind who built men like you and me. She's built her entire public persona on our foundations. Your defeat was her launchpad. My public humiliation is meant to be her coronation." I pulled the folder David had given me from my jacket. It wasn't just his location, it was a complete file. Newspaper clippings from his doomed campaign, quotes from Eleanor praising him before she left, and the devastating articles that came after, detailing his campaign's collapse. "She didn't just leave you, Croft. She gutted you and then wrote your political obituary. She told me once that you were a brilliant man, but a little too trusting. She said your biggest mistake was thinking she'd be satisfied as an apprentice." A muscle jumped in his jaw. For the first time I saw the flicker, the banked embers of a decade-old fury. "The media is eating up her story," I continued, laying the trap. "The woman behind the throne finally stepping into the light. No one remembers you. No one knows this is the second monument she's tried to tear down to build her own pedestal. She's counting on that. Counting on your silence." I placed the folder on the woodpile between us. "I'm not asking you to endorse me. I'm not asking you to get back into the sewer of politics. I'm asking you to set the record straight, to tell your story. Let the voters see the blueprint of the architect's first project." He stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind whispering through the pines. He saw it for what it was, a choice. A return to the pain, the public shame, the world that had broken him. Or the quiet, honorable solitude he had built for himself. "You're asking me to step back into the fire that burned my life to the ground?" he said, his voice gravelly with emotion. "The fire is coming for all of us, Croft," I countered. "She won't stop with me." Croft looked from the folder to the distant peaks, his face a stone mask. "She built her career in my ashes," he said, his voice quiet but raw. "She called it a mercy killing." He finally met my gaze, the banked embers glowing hot. "Fine. Let's see how the architect likes the fire." We didn't call a press conference. That would have been my circus. This had to be his truth. David found a veteran political journalist from the Post, a man with a reputation for integrity and a skepticism for melodrama. They met at a quiet diner halfway between the mountains and the city. No cameras, just a tape recorder on a Formica tabletop. The interview dropped 2 days later, an online exclusive that detonated the entire news cycle. It wasn't an attack, it was a eulogy. Croft, with methodical precision, laid out the entire anatomy of his political death. He produced old memos, campaign finance reports, and a timeline that mirrored my own recent experience with chilling accuracy. He never raised his voice. He simply presented the facts of how his brilliant, trusted protégé had dismantled his life's work from the inside, convincing him it was his own failure until the very end. He called her a once-in-a-generation talent, and then the kill shot. But talent without character is just a prettier weapon. She didn't build a new campaign, she just occupied the fortress I built after convincing the king to abdicate. The narrative shattered. Suddenly, Eleanor wasn't a woman scorned, finding her voice. She was a predator with a pattern. The headline wasn't Vance versus Vance anymore. It was the Croft Memorandum. Thorne, standing beside her at a disastrous press event, looked less like a partner and more like her next mark. I watched on TV as a reporter shouted a question that made her composure finally crack. "Ms. Vance, are you the architect or just a very good arsonist?" Her icy mask fractured into pure fury. My phone rang for the first time in a week. It was a donor, one of the first who'd put his money on hold. "Arthur," he said, his voice energized, "I just reread your policy paper on infrastructure. We need a builder in the Senate, not a demolition crew. I'm doubling my contribution." The polls hadn't moved yet, but the ground beneath our feet had shifted. She had made it personal. I had made it a question of character. "Do you think running against him is an act of empowerment or just petty revenge that's bound to backfire?"